Hello, and we are live on the Power Hour with Dare to Scale.
Good morning, and welcome to the show. Or at least welcome to the discussion more than the show. Efficient business operations, indeed.
It is. We're talking about efficient business operations today because we've done a series on strategy. Now, you can have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you don't have flawless business operations, what happens? Not a great deal, isn't it? So
you could also say if you don't have if you have flawless business operations without a good strategy, that there's a problem there too. Anyway, that's a different discussion.
That is a different discussion. But yes, so today we are talking about business operations. So welcome again to the Power Hour with Dare to Scale. You are joined by a lot of people who are joining us on either on YouTube, where we are streaming live, or on LinkedIn. So welcome again, and greetings from wherever in the world you're joining us from. We said good morning because we are here in the UAE. It's a bright, sunny day. Winter is setting in. We're very happy about that. So what are we going to do today? When we are talking about efficient business operations, what we decided to do is actually do a chapter run through of our book, Dare to Scale. So this book actually is divided into those 5 elements that are crucial to any business. And today we are starting with part 1 as we do a chapter run through. So what are some of the things that we're discussing here, Evan?
So a couple of things are definitely from your plan, when you have your strategy and your plan, it's setting the right priorities. Yeah. So you know what it is you want to be obviously chasing. So everybody's then aligned and working towards the same sort of goal. And getting everybody to work very well together will require processes.
Yeah.
So it's defining and documenting your processes. And of course, now that everybody's working together, you'd want to have some decent communication up and down all through the business to make sure that everybody's aligned while they're doing their work and heading towards the right priorities.
Yeah.
So that's all excellent. And then the final step is measuring your performance. And then obviously realignment. Because
realignment, business, absolutely.
Yeah. So every business, if you're not sort of flexible or, using the great word these days, pivot, if something's not working, you can then sort of set your redirection.
Yeah, totally. And, stay with us till the end, because today we are also going to share a couple of live examples of what happens. So when we decided we're going to run a series on efficient business operations, we were watching some of the companies that we interact with, some of the big brands that we interact with on a day-to-day basis, and how is our experience with that. Now, why do I say our experience? Because eventually, when you run great operations, who does it reflect really well on? Of course, your company, but who do you do this for?
Totally
for your customers,
right?
yeah, for the end user, for your clients, because they are the ones who are gaining that consistent experience that comes from running efficient business operations, flawless operations, precise. So there are some stories that we experienced, and I thought, what happened there? Where are those gaps that ball fell off? So stay with us till the end. Right, let's kick off into this discussion straight away. As I said, Evan, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you know, you're talking about efficient operations, did you know, obviously, we also do a podcast. And the Dare to Scale show is the name of the podcast. And we're also launching, like we're doing here, there's a series on efficient business operations.
Yeah.
There's actually a show series that we're doing on Dare to Scale you the entrepreneur, you the founder. And we've got some great speakers lined up for the next couple of, really, it is the next couple of months, all the way through to early January. So look for that. Go to daretoscale.com/podcast. Sign up there, get the notifications when the shows come through, and enjoy.
Very nice. That is true. I'm glad you talked about this because we're running 2 parallel series. Fabulous. Now, let's talk about operations. As Evan ran through, so what are some of the key elements that go into making those operations really run as a well-oiled machine. And we're going to go through that again. First of all, setting and meeting the right priorities. How do you set priorities? Priorities, first of all, come from the strategy that you put together. Is that right? Now, if that's the case, the priorities are, how are they then translated into actual actions? How is it filtered down? And how are you, I'll go straight down to measuring those priorities. But before we go there, Evan, I know you have an interesting framework that you use, which is very simple, urgent versus important. Can you talk us a little bit about, talk us through that?
Oh, look, totally. That urgent versus important. I think it was actually Eisenhower who actually did that. And it's very, very simple. Where there's 4 boxes:
Yep.
urgent, not urgent; important, important, not important. So
Yep.
anything that is urgent and important obviously takes some priority. But if it's important but not urgent, that's where you plan. That's very much your strategic thinking sort of time. If there's something that's not important, not urgent, that's pretty much not good. You know, it's what you would say: do, delegate, or dump. That's the dump piece. Just get rid of it. If it's important, maybe not urgent, that's where you delegate. So get somebody else to help you with that. So yeah, it's a very interesting sort of framework. But what it will do is it will help you work out what is important for now.
Yeah.
Look, you can also look at that from a slightly different point of view, which is the 80-20. That's the Pareto sort of principle.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
If you, it's a very interesting concept where you 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort, right? So do the things that are going to give you. So do the work on the 20% items that will give you 80% results. If you expand that a little bit further and take 20% of the 20%, essentially, if you do the maths on that, 64% of your results come from 4% of your activity. So
Brilliant.
do the important things today that will actually move the needle, is all that's really saying. So yeah, you have a list, work out what's important, and then essentially work out the priority on that and pick the things that are actually going to make a difference. And that's what you focus on.
Absolutely brilliant. I love that. I love what you brought in. That's a couple of levels deeper into the Pareto principle as well. That was too many numbers for me. Can you repeat that again for me, please?
The simple principle is 80-20. 20% of the effort gives you 80% of the results.
Got that.
Conversely, sometimes when you're dealing with customers, you know, if you spend 80% of your time, they're only getting 20% of the results. So that's all that's really saying.
Got that.
So if you then drill down into that 20% of effort, and essentially do 20% of that, you know what I mean? And you do the maths on it, basically you can come down to where 4% of everything that's really, really super important will give you 64% of the results. So it really is a matter of honing right down to what it is that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck.
Absolutely brilliant.
Like, okay, so
that's really good.
Put that in context. If you're doing, I don't know, a sales page that converts, right? And you're working on that versus, you know, the office is a mess, I need to do filing. Well, that's an easy one. Of course, you're gonna pick the sales letter.
Yeah.
But most of us pick something that's easy and we'll do the filing because, oh, it's too hard to put the words together to do the copy, you know, for the sales page. Look, there's a wonderful TED talk that we saw recently. Actually, Washa, you can talk about that. But basically, you know, just count down and do the thing. It's like eat your frog, right? Eat the frog. Do the thing that you don't want to do, but it'll actually move the needle.
Yeah, I think that TED talk was Mel Robbins, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It is, and her 5-second countdown to 5. 5-second countdown. It's brilliant because it started as a framework for a very different issue, but I get what you're saying. It is countdown from 5 because it triggers a different part of your brain to then take over, and you get down into
make
that
action.
getting things done, action oriented thing. Yeah, so it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you getting on. Yeah, I like that. But I think we're going to put a link to that TED Talk. It is absolutely well worth watching. Brilliant TED Talk. I think it's a good, nearly 10 years old now.
It is, and look, it's only 20 minutes. It's a TED Talk.
It is
absolutely brilliant, and she's a very engaging speaker.
It is. So let's go back to setting and meeting the right priority. And I'm looking at the book because we're doing a book extract today, or the chapter extract today. So one of the first things that we talk about in the setting your priorities is we connected back to the strategy, because in the strategy you work out your big milestones along the way. You're setting your 5-year strategy, 3-year strategy, or in today's times maybe it really is a one year strategy. It really is that thinking process that will take you to the end of that milestone at the 12-month mark. Now, what happens between that? You are now breaking down that big milestone into smaller milestones. Maybe it's a quarterly milestone. What needs to happen in those 90 days or those 13 weeks? Those quarterly milestones are then broken down further into maybe monthly milestones. I use the word maybe a lot, but probably is because not everybody does that. And we'd love to hear what you do. So if it is not broken down into a monthly, maybe some people prefer a half a quarter, like a 6-week one. So ideally, it is then broken down even further into weekly and then daily. Why would you do that? The reason you would do that is the further it is broken down into smaller chunk, it's like eat the frog. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So the smaller the goals, the smaller the milestones, the smaller the task list, or the smaller that achievable milestone, it is easier for it to be filtered down through your company for the frontline people who are actually doing the doing, sleeves rolled up. Those are the ones who are doing it. And by all means, share that big picture, but also break it down into chunks for people to grasp it, process it, and actually do that. That also helps in giving your team, people who are in the front line, to see how their activities on a day-to-day basis is leading or helping the company keep moving that extra step forward regularly towards that big milestone that has been set out. What do you think, Evan?
No, completely. And we're going to get to communication
shortly.
We are. So there's a couple of extra sort of pieces in there.
Yeah.
But that alignment and essentially that sort of feedback loop as well, is important within that whole process.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the horizon that you look at in terms of the priority and or the target, if you will. I mean, quarterly is a fairly good one. I've actually heard of 12-week as well. So 12 weeks, and then essentially you can reset everything depending on the type of business and depending on what the urgency is. Like last year, for example, a 12-week sort of window would have made complete sense. So set the priority, work towards it, and then review. And if you need to make changes, you can do it on the fly. So it's not so much an annual. We must do this, and we must keep plugging at that. That realignment that we talk about with the performance measurement, which is one of the other pieces of operations. Will actually help you, like we say, pivot. Find what it is, and then move along.
That's true. So once again, welcome to the Power Hour on Dare to Scale. Today we are talking about efficient operations, and we're doing a book extract from our book, Dare to Scale. So now, in the book, of course, we've included a couple of really brilliant stories on people we mentor. So go check it out if you haven't already. But one of the things that you said earlier, Evan, is it was almost like a by-the-by conversation before we started live, is when those milestones are not broken down, when those milestones are not communicated properly, what happens? What does that go-to place that we often see in small businesses who are looking to scale up is that stage that we call firefighting. Not we, just Evan and me. That's pretty much a well-known phenomenon across the world. The minute you go into firefighting, yes, go back to the strategy to see what happened over there, how we lost track of where we are headed, and go back into that operational plan as well to see how we really chunked that big milestone down enough for everybody to grasp it, and how we wavered, what happened. It just as a matter of course correcting, have we not course corrected and gone back on track, or have we just gone off into that 1 degree of change has happened and suddenly we find off the track that we have set for ourselves. So keep a watch on that. The minute you find yourself firefighting, two places to go: strategy first and operations. So I want to move on to another page, because this is there are a couple of bullet points that we have put over there. And I'm going to read out actually this passage, going back to the daring milestones, which are those big milestones that you put for yourself. Here are some examples for you to go through when working on your own long-term goals. Successfully deliver the brand promise standard of service to a certain number of clients over the next 5 years. Successfully attain a certain market share in your industry, city, region, or over the next 5 years, or whatever that duration that you have set for yourself. Successfully receive a number of referrals to become the most respected or referred name in the industry over the next 5 years. So what is it that you are setting those big milestones for? And that forms an integral part of that communication when it flows down, again, through your company. It shows up in your marketing. It shows up in that entire language that you use within your business. So
now just remember that your daring milestones are, some people refer to them as your North Star goal. So this is a fairly long horizon. We want to be the best in the industry kind of thing. And then when that's broken down, it might be, market share, it might be number of customers served, it might be any number of things. And that, in a lot of respects, is going to be somewhat a sort of an exponential kind of a curve. So work, and a little change will happen. And then eventually when you get towards the end of it, getting closer to the goal, it's going to happen fairly quickly.
It is.
But you set that, so you at least know where you're going. So when you break it down on an annual, quarterly basis, that's front and center of one of the things we need to do.
It is. And I'm now going to go over to the next section, or the next belt in that element of efficient operations. I'm going over to page 163, Evan, just so you know where I am, is to, now that you know what needs to happen, how clearly defined or how well documented or how well tested are your business operations? Why do we talk about business operations? Evan, I want you to talk a little bit about that.
My background is hospitality, and one of the best examples you can always refer to is a restaurant.
Yeah.
So you've got essentially the back of house, or what they call the heart of house these days. So you've got the chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You've got the serving staff, as in the people in the restaurant itself. You've got like the maitre d', that sort of thing, right? So everybody needs to communicate and work together.
Yeah.
Serving a cup of coffee is simple enough, but there is a process to it.
Yeah.
And there's a certain look and feel, the brand standard or whatever it is of what a cup of coffee actually looks like. A nice saucer, a nice cup, a biscuit, the spoon, that sort of thing. And it really is that part of that process to every time deliver the right thing. Now, if you ever want a really good example of brilliant operations that are so fine-tuned and process-driven, always look at McDonald's. I mean, that is the perfect
Always
franchise.
look at the who?
McDonald's.
McDonald's.
Right?
Oh,
it's perfect in terms of just how they've documented everything.
Yeah.
You can take anybody, put them into a role, and just everything is there for them to follow, to learn and follow. And this is where your sort of feedback, your review, and everything sort of comes into play. If it's that documented, it's absolutely brilliant. Which leads on to the next part of this particular section, and that is we talk about people and process dependent, but we'll get there in a second.
Yeah. And yes, McDonald's, yes, absolutely. They're a well-known example, totally. So why business operations? Again, in most small businesses, it's still founder-led businesses. When you go, Evan seemed to have dropped off. I'm sure he'll join in a minute. But in a founder-led business, what happens? In most cases, you start off the business on your own, and then you get in someone else. Hey, welcome back. So, Evan, I was just talking about why in a founder-led business, what happens when you start off your business, usually in the beginning, you're on your own. And then you start adding some team around you. What happens when you start adding people around you in your company? How do you delegate? Is it a reactive delegation? Or do you have a simple process written? And when you say business process, it doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, the simpler, the better. Detail, yes, simple. It could be as simple as a one-pager. How do you delegate to the new person? Because if you don't have a one-pager as a guideline, you're pretty much going into reactive delegation, which again means if that person who's occupying that particular role changes tomorrow, you're going to go through the same thing all over again, and you keep repeating that process rather than extracting what's in your head, putting it down on paper, and setting that as a benchmark that you are attaching to your brand promise, the level of service, the standards of delivery. So it becomes easier for every person that you add into your company as part of your team to get into that DNA or absorb the DNA of what your brand promise is so much more easier than a reactive delegation. What do you think, Evan?
No, look, I think that's absolutely right. Where you have somebody who's a solopreneur, essentially just the one person show, everything's in the head.
Yeah.
So as you go along, you will work out better ways and different ways of doing things. And the process is probably fantastic. The minute somebody else comes in to the business, and of course, when you're working with your mentees, it's working out the right next person to bring into the business. Anyway, so when that person comes in to start helping out, you then have to obviously hand over. And part of that is the delegation sort of space. But when you're handing over, if you have that process not properly documented, sort of with all of the relevant steps, not just here are 5 of the 10 steps, but these are the important ones. Get those right, and everything else will be fine. Not so much. I mean, these days there's absolutely no excuse. When you're handing over, making that sort of list, you can use something like Otter, right? Speak. It'll do the transcription and just speak your way through it, and you'll have a lot of the heavy lifting done.
Yeah.
But I want to share a little anecdote.
Go on.
I have no idea where it's come from. At least I can't remember where it's come from. But I think it's along the lines of I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't really fully understand anything until you can teach it.
Nice.
So in terms of that, that's where you're actually teaching somebody, and that's why I say you use Otter or something like that to record everything.
Yeah.
So that you're not sitting there in isolation. It's like that sales page. I don't really want to do this. You want use some tools and get it out there. So at least at a minimum, you've got a recording of it.
Yeah. Make it easy on yourself.
Totally.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just putting it out there to say right now, if you have joined us on the Power Hour with Dare to Scale, tell us, what do you do to document your processes within your own companies? Or if you're working for another company, or if you're working for somebody, then how are the processes documented, and what are your experiences so far? Feel free to tell us. And yes, I already see a few comments coming in. Golden Arches of McDonald's always maintain the best operationals. Yeah, totally. Best operational process. Very nice. So I want to read out another passage from now. We're going into people and process driven. So, most family run businesses in some parts of the world are built on loyal team members or loyal employees who bring in their experience, which has gained over a period of time. It's
Yeah.
absolutely the case. And there is great value in any organization in having the strength of experience and loyalty of these wonderful, wonderful people who have been part of the business for decades even. Now, what happens when when the time of succession comes through?
Okay, I will say never mind succession, because one of the stories in this chapter is Eleanor.
Yes,
So
that
not
is
only
true.
succession, but it's also if a key knowledge holder, and really that's the key thing there. The key knowledge
Yeah.
holder leaves the business. In Eleanor's case, it was compounded because it was actually two.
Yeah. That's true. And what happens? Because then you go back into almost taking a few steps back to begin that documentation, to begin that learning process again, and learning everything the hard way. That's a great story about Elena, though. So, yeah, so in a family business, or a family run business, that's usually the case. And when the time for succession comes through, when maybe the founder is bringing in the second generation probably has different views, different way of doing things. How do you base that different way of doing things if you don't have anything documented in the first place? Just something to think about. So that is, we'll go deeper in it in the book, so have a look. But yeah, Evan?
No, I was going to say, and because this is part of processes, we'll talk about this next
Yeah.
week in a lot more detail.
That is true, because we're bringing in a guest professional who does this for a living. So we're going to go deeper in that conversation about business processes. Why is it important? Why is it a critical part of your business? And how to do it, how to make it easy on yourself, and how do you get your entire team engaged and enrolled into making this happen? Because remember, if it's easy for the team, it's easy for the business. If it's easy for the founder, it's easy for the business. Remember, the business comes first. Put that focus on. And we're going to be talking a great deal in depth when we come back on the 10th of November.
I just want to note here that we were talking about family businesses and, if succession, somebody leaves, that sort of thing, where all we're sort of highlighting there is the danger of relying on one person or a series of people in the business, and assuming that they will always be there. And conversely, there's also, if there's too much process, you take the soul out of the team. So maybe we should talk a little bit about that.
Totally. It is, it's a blend of both for me. Have great processes, bring in great people, because it is eventually for the customer, while the process in the background makes that experience consistent for your end customer. It is the people who are putting that heart and soul into it to deliver that that personal touch that you can never take away. While the world is moving towards a great deal of tech businesses, AI is eventually going to be playing a large role. It still is today. At the same time, that human touch can never leave us, because here we're talking about small businesses, those brick and mortar businesses that shop around the corner. That human touch is critical. So remember that when you bring in your next person in. And when we are now talking about the process over here, I want to now jump into the next section, which is communication. How do you communicate within your company? Once you know what your priorities are, you now have a process built in. And what comes next? It is, how do you communicate? So, Evan, tell us a little bit about communication, because this is where we go into that wonderful story yesterday's example.
The important thing, we actually did a live about this a couple of months back. We were talking about communication, just more broadly speaking, but within the context of a business. It really is, using clear language, getting the message across, no fluffy or fat language as it's known. It's like your example is usually with an email. It's almost write it and then look at it again the next day, just to make sure that it makes sense, but not to you, to somebody else who's actually reading it. And it's really quite a skill. It really is quite a skill.
It is very much.
I mean, again, in your the food and beverage sort of space, just within hotels, you have daily briefings before service actually starts. Some of that's to communicate things like the special of the day, the upsell that you might be wanting to try and achieve. You might be wanting to promote, I don't know, a coffee after dinner or something like that. But whatever it is, whatever the focus is, you need to make that very, very clear. So that it's grasped and understood very, very easily by the team. And it is about being clear, consistent, and transparent in how you communicate.
Nice.
The start of that particular section, I just want to read it because it makes me smile.
Go on.
The usual corporate scenario is all about meetings, and more meetings. So, and it mentions me. So I still think about this, all the years in the corporates and corporates plural, so many of them, and just how much time is spent sitting in meetings to discuss or plan the things to do and having no time to actually do them. It's wonderful, So that can be rather stressful.
It is.
But the small to medium-sized organizations, you've actually got the power to take the decision on how you and your team utilize your time. And clearly communicating with regular touch points is the key to this, absolutely.
So starting with maybe your daily touch points first thing in the morning, your weekly touch points, monthly, quarterly, having those touch points is key, and it needs to be cascaded within your company. So every 10 people have a separate touch point that is whatever duration that you pick. So let me rephrase that. When you have a touch point, I literally went off in a tangent in my head. So I thought, well, that didn't make sense.
That's why I'm smiling, because I knew what she was doing.
When you pick a touch point, so let's call it a daily touch point, first thing in the morning, no more than 10 people in that touch point, remember, because the more people you include in a specific touch point, the less or the more diluted that sharing actually becomes. So that's just a tip. 10 people, if there are more than 10 people, have a separate group doing that touch point. And as you go through the ranks within your company, make sure they all individually have their own touch points as well. Call it touch points, call it huddles, call it meetings, whatever. If you're calling it a meeting, it needs to be a stand-up meeting. If it is a daily meeting, stand up, please, because it's not a sit down. Don't bring pen and paper to it. Stand up, give your share, and go away. Again, there are details in the book. Go and have a look. But it needs to be a stand-up meeting. Share what you're going to do on that day, so everybody is getting on the same page. Walk away, get that thing done, come back tomorrow, report again. So, Evan, I want you to share that story from yesterday. What happens? Because over here, we are now talking about filtering it down to everybody, right down to the front line, and to essentially hold up the brand promise, the standard of that brand promise that you're promising to your end customer. And this happened to you yesterday.
It did. And it's interesting in the sense that, again, look, I use hotels, but there's so many different ways that the hotel sort of fits into, and give great examples can be used. You have the front of house, so guest facing, and back or heart of house, where there's like the finance, HR teams, they never necessarily see the public face.
Yeah.
And yet when they happen to go into a guest area, right?
Yeah.
It's like in the old days, you talked about a green door. sort of the upstairs, downstairs, but you go through into the public facing space. And there should be a shift in how you conduct yourself. But remember, you've also got internal customers within the business. So really, it shouldn't change.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm setting the scene and give that example simply because there was a device that decided it was going to stop working. And I actually took the device into one of the large companies to get it repaired. And it so turned out that I went into the office, and this is the sort of the hilarious thing. I ended up at the right office. In fact, no, I'd actually taken the device somewhere else. They couldn't repair it, and they directed me to essentially the head office. So I ended up going there, and it's a different area. So it took me a while to get there. So I've got a bit of journey behind me. Right. Yeah. So I've already spent a bit of time there. Found the office. Great. There it is. Doors open. Reception desk. I can see that inside. So in I walk, and I start talking to somebody there. Now, first up, there was nobody actually behind the desk. There were two people to the left of the desk having a little chat. So I walk in, not sure quite what's going on. And then I say to the lady who actually turned around and started speaking to me, I said, okay, I've got the printer. Well, actually, okay, so it turned out to be a printer. I've got this device. It needs to be repaired. She looked at me in a very interesting way. And that was simply, oh my God, you can't be here. And then she actually said the words, sorry, we need to speak outside. You're an external. You're not allowed here.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, interesting. And the whole point of that is, like I said, we went outside, had a discussion, and I gave the feedback. And this lady completely didn't understand any of that. And I got a whole bunch of excuses as to why she felt was right what she did.
Yeah.
I don't care what your internal policy is. And I said to her, look, I'm a very loyal customer. And just think how it would be for somebody else to actually hear that. Like if you were a customer, how do you think you would handle that? Mm-hmm. Looked at me, didn't know what I was talking about, kind of thing, and then proceeded to give me some more excuses. I said, look, please just take the feedback. If that happened to you, you wouldn't be happy about it. I'm just saying and asking you to please consider, to say, look, this is a back of house area or something like that. And I think the problem was this person was in the back of house and they wasn't trained to deal with customers, and it just, it was interesting.
I know.
Really, really interesting.
So what happened over here, you as a loyal customer ended up thinking, well, sure, I might be an external, still a loyal customer. Got into a head office rather than a retail office because the address wasn't clear, first of all. So how that entire thing cascaded into now a loyal customer standing there thinking, right, okay, so I get that I probably shouldn't be here, but I am here now. I'm not asking to be served at this stage. At least direct me somewhere else rather than saying you can't be here. Thanks for that. So it really is just it brought to mind the topic of today. It's saying, how is this message actually conveyed all the way down throughout your company? It doesn't matter whether the person is a receptionist, the person, in fact, even more so, because that's the face of your company. How do you?
And there's a bigger piece that it's your DNA and the values and ethics and all that sort of stuff. And as you say, it's that filtering down. So everybody's on the same page. By the way, you talked about no more than 10 people in the stand-up dailies or the touch points. Did you know that in the old Roman army, this goes back a very, very long time, a centurion looks after 100, more or less 100 people.
Yeah.
And there are like subdivisions within there. And it's essentially, and even today, that whole model has been sort of replicated. You never have more than 10 people reporting to you. Yeah. If it's more than 10, and I know you teach this with your mentees as well, no more than 10 because it gets too hard. Yeah. And that structure, you can see, it's been around for a very, very long time, and it makes sense. So you come together. We use a win from yesterday or something like that. Then there's what I need to do today. Any help I might need, tuck, 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 done. Yeah. Right? It's not a place to find solutions. It's not a place to sit down, have coffee. It's not just stand up, say it, and get moving. And it just brings everybody back into focus and move forward together. Yeah.
It is. It is. In the comments, Amanda says even a huddle over a phone should be done standing up. Oh, I like that. So
I
even
like
if
that.
it's you have a virtual team spread across wherever, if you're doing a daily stand-up meeting, it's daily touch point, stand up over there too, because it changes the energy. It changes it triggers that action-oriented mind, because you're doing a immediate action huddle or a touch point or a meeting or whatever. The great one. I like that. It's like when telesales people are trained. Smile even if you're on the phone, because your smile carries through. So stand up and do your daily touch points. Very nice. So Evan, we go on to the fourth point that comprises of the basic pillars, the fourth pillar of your efficient operations, which is now measuring your performance. So you've got your right priorities, you've got your documentation done for your processes, you've communicated that, and now what? Now it is time to measure whether again, depending on your business model, you can measure a weekly performance, monthly, quarterly. Please do check on monthly and quarterlies, but you can break that down even to weekly. So Evan, over to you.
And again, we've talked about, in one of the podcasts, we talked about
Yeah, we did.
performance and measurements.
Yeah.
And there's the concept of forward looking and I suppose backward looking, if you will. The analogy used there was you're driving a car. Your forward looking is through the windscreen. That's the road ahead. Totally, you can make corrections and obviously stay on the road, which is a good thing. Backward looking or trailing measurements, so things like your financials, at least do them once a month. You have to do that, your bank reconciliation, all that sort of stuff. And while it's backward looking, it gives you an idea of where you were. And some measurements like days outstanding or something like that, generally, it's a trailing sort of indicator or lagging indicator. But your forward-looking one, might be things like the number of sales on a daily basis for the week, for the month, whatever.
Very true.
But performance is important, or measuring the performance, and it has to be something realistic. There's a wonderful quote in the book, and when I say quote, it's a saying. So when performance is measured, and this is Pearson's law, when performance is measured, performance improves. Okay. That makes sense. So what you're inspecting, what is, in your awareness, is obviously what you'll focus on. Sounds right. But here's the kicker: when performance is measured and reported back. So in the context of the daily, touch points, the huddles, that sort of thing, you report back, the rate of improvement accelerates.
Nice.
Because it's about accountability, and you're saying you do it, you report back that you've done it.
Yeah.
And, it really does keep things moving forward.
Yeah.
But the forward-looking or leading indicators are definitely one of the most critical ones. And you really need to find what it is that makes a difference in your business.
Yeah. Continue, please. No. I was just going to say, while you're talking about this, first of all, you mentioned that particular episode that we did. We'll post a link to that one. I think it was called Through the Windshield.
How do you drive the car?
Through the windshield, yeah. So we'll post a link to that podcast in the comments box. Go listen to it. That'll give the fuller context to what we're talking about. And there are a couple of things from the book that I also want to pick up. Is what are some of the key metrics that you want to measure? So consider some of this list here, and of course add on to whatever else that is very industry specific or business specific that you would measure. Is a project progress measurements, or then the specifics, which, as Evan was saying, number of sales, new hires, orders delivered, top line, bottom line when you've done your books for the month. There are two others, which is customer satisfaction, your NPS score, and your employee satisfaction, which is eNPS score. How many times do you measure that within your company? Or how many times do you actually have that open town hall, or just these days, it's so easy. Bring everybody together in a virtual room and have a conversation, meet over lunch, meet over coffee. So That's actually very easy. So what are some of those touch points that you mentioned? And we talked about this in that podcast. So definitely go listen to it and come back and tell us what you specifically took away and what is it that you are now considering applying within your businesses.
Yeah.
Now, I want to recap in what we discussed in today's Power Hour. We did a summary on the chapter, and the chapter is on efficient business operations. There are 4 very strong belts to that efficient operation, starting with setting and meeting your priorities, building a well-documented and well-defined, tested business processes, clear and consistent communication to then filter that down and filter information back up again. And remember that, because we didn't talk about that, and I'm sure we will touch on that next time when we join in. And the 4th one is performance measurement and realignment, correcting the course, getting back on track and continuing, because the minute you find yourself firefighting, these are the 4 elements to go back and check. And if there's no answer over there, go back to strategy and check what happened over there. We're going to come back, and as you can see on the screen, this is part 1. We're going to come back for part 2 of this series, which is on the 10th of November, where we're bringing a guest on specifically business processes. It's going to be a great conversation, particularly for small businesses, founder-led businesses, and particularly those who are now looking to break through that ceiling and hit your scaling up goals. So remember to join us. Evan, as a closing.
Yeah, look, it's very interesting. Actually, Washi, you've got the book in front of you. Can you just hold up the beginning of the chapter?
Oh, yeah. This is today's chapter, yes?
Yeah.
Fabulous. And it is right here. There. Can you see?
Yeah. What I'm looking at is the 5 elements. And the 5 elements are actually on the website as well. But those are the sort of the 5 key areas of the business itself.
Yeah.
The 6th and sort of partly hidden one is actually you,
That
the founder.
one. That one.
Yeah, dare to transform into a founder to leader. So that's obviously one of the key things. You and your relationship to the business, and then within the business itself. And all of these 5 elements work together. No one is more important than the other. That said, if you don't have a good strategy, then the rest of them can obviously falter. Maybe not fall apart, but falter. And efficient operations is obviously key to everything, because that's where you're engaging with your customer and actually delivering your product or your service or whatever it happens to be, with efficient operations with people, because most of these things are people driven. So those 2 work very, very closely together. Cash and systems obviously support. Your business model is what the operations and people are working on, and then the strategy is the overall direction. So everything works together. And when you really get that working seamlessly and efficiently together, there is no limit.
As we say in Dare to Scale, that's when the magic happens.
Correct.
So we've just done an overview of efficient operations. Come back for an in-depth conversation next time
on processes.
And we will see you. There are some comments still coming up, and particularly about measuring and reporting, measuring performance and reporting back. Continue with those comments. These are great inputs that are coming through. And thank you for joining us on the Power Hour today. Come back on the 10th of November.
Total pleasure, and we'll see you on the 10th.
We'll see you on the 10th. Bye for now.
Cheers. Bye.